Hey everyone, this is Allard1, and today we've got this task that I've been working on where Super Punch Out gets beaten as fast as possible without ever pressing the A button to throw a single Super Punch. The interesting thing about Super Punch Out is that Super Punches, while powerful, aren't your only tool at your disposal for getting fast times, because this game also has dizzy knockdowns, where if you land several punches in a row in a short period of time, the opponent goes dizzy and can be instantly knocked down from that animation. So for Gabby Jay, you're seeing him being punched in the face repeatedly once I forced him to block low by waiting one frame to tap up. So I can work towards making him go dizzy, then simply land a punch as he wanders back in to send him to the mat. Now for this next phase, Gabby is forced to step to the side since he got up with less than 33 hit points, which actually gives you another instant knockdown window. And because of how fast this was and how little hit points he has by the time he's knocked down the second time, he actually stays down for the KO, which is the only instance of this in the entire TAS. Now, coming up here is Bear Hugger, which ended up being a pretty annoying fight for this challenge. I mentioned earlier that in order to get an opponent dizzy, you need to land several punches in a row in a short period of time. But with Bear Hugger, you can't really do that fast enough to where Bear ends up more dizzy after each volley of attacks while he's idle, like he is for most of this fight. So what I ended up doing here is to just land 10 right jabs into each of his taunts. The right jab deals 4 damage each and opponents have 80 hit points. So after landing the 10th jab, Bear will be at half health, which is exactly what triggers him to go to the back of the ring and throw out this more aggressive attack pattern that we actually can get a dizzy off of. So for these next phases, Bear will have less health. So trying to force dizzy knockdowns won't be necessary, we just have to knock him down with damage. I end up landing a jab into a taunt, then I deal with the rest of the damage by provoking him into doing bear hugs. This fight also ends up being so long that your character gets to do faster jabs because of the power-up mechanic, which you don't really ever see in speedruns since typically you finish opponents way before this ever comes into play. Also, that last phase required me to stun Bear by punching him in the stomach on the very first frame of him taunting, so if you're perplexed on how I punched him in the stomach without him auto-guarding it, that's why. Of all the fights in this task, this is the slowest one, and at least for me I couldn't find anything better than that. If you've got any ideas on how to improve this fight, feel free to let me know in the comments. Next up is Piston Hurricane. This fight's pretty quick, and you'll start to see some knockdown times that are actually faster than world record times on occasion. This is because we don't have to worry about setting up for a super knockdown at all since the super meter is completely irrelevant to us here. So for phase 2 here, I opt to throw a lot of right gut punches because it ends up dealing 1 extra damage per punch, and it sets me up for landing a 3 damage jab for the knockdown a bit earlier than a more damaging gut punch. It also happens to set me up for a better refill in phase 3 that allows me to avoid the hit stop from countering Piston's uppercut. All I have to do here is land 2 quick right gut punches, and it barely knocks him down for the TKO. Okay, next up is Bald Bull, and there's a bit to go over here. First off, the strategy I found to dizzy Bull has a 1 frame margin of error, meaning if you're frame perfect on everything, or if you've lost 1 frame after landing the first punch, this strategy will still work. However, if you lose 2 or more frames, this strategy fails. Anytime I use a right gut punch here, it's specifically because I need to deal more damage so that Bull gets a lower refill in the next phase. I really need Bull to have specifically 36 hit points for phase 2 because right gut punches deal 6 damage when Bull isn't stunned, and it's perfectly divisible by 6. You'll also see a sneaky instance of a double hit here, which I opt for because when a double hit occurs, the hit stop of your punch is faster and you get to throw the next punch sooner. And normally a double hit is a bad idea because when you take damage, it negatively impacts the opponent's refill for the next phase, but because Bull is scheduled to always do a bull charge for phase 3, the higher refill is completely irrelevant because countering the bull charge is always an instant knockdown. Alright, so that's 1 circuit down, 3 to go. In general, the minor circuit has very limited luck as far as speedrunning goes, and that definitely stays true in this challenge as well. Major circuit is where the luck really starts ramping up, and it does so immediately with the first fight, Bob Charlie. Bob has a handful of interesting things to talk about. First off, he's very susceptible to being dizzied if you hit him in the gut. However, the punch that deals the most damage to him happens to actually be your right jab. which ends up making right gut punches totally useless in this fight since it does less damage and is slower. Bob ends up taking the first knockdown at 420 after a barrage of gut punches and left jabs to strike a balance between how dizzy Bob is getting, as well as speed since left jabs happen to be faster. So for phase 2, I ensure Bob gets to throw his first punch, which allows me to punch him slightly earlier than if he does a random feint, and I throw a single right jab into it for the extra damage for a better refill in phase 3. The rest of this phase is just left gut punches to get Bob dizzy as soon as possible. And for phase 3 there, you noticed I was able to actually take him down in 3 right jabs. So right jabs deal 5 damage, and the health refill Bob got for phase 3 was 15 hit points. So we're able to just barely take him down in those 3 punches. Okay, so coming up next is Dragon Chand, and you're about to see the fastest dizzy knockdown in the game. Dragon is extremely susceptible to getting dizzy off of gut punches, so I end up just throwing left gut punches any chance I get. Dragon will attempt to step to the right and throw slow jabs, but a delayed right gut punch will land against those too. For phase 2, Dragon can either do kicks or attempt to heal himself, so I manipulate the fastest delay during his heal and throw more gut punches. Some of these are right gut punches because they deal a little bit more damage, and I need some of that damage for the knockdown to be as fast as it is here. Phase 3 has the same reasoning too, where some of these need to be right gut punches for damage reasons. All in all, Dragon Chand's a pretty simple fight for this challenge, with the only luck event in the fight being the heal at the start of phase 2. Now, the next fight, Mass Muscle, will have quite a bit more randomness when it comes to landing punches while he isn't stunned. He has a 1/4 chance of a punch being blocked for any initial unstunned punch, and a 7/16 chance of blocking any buffered subsequent unstunned punches. This doesn't apply for any punches that intercept any of Muscle's attacks though. For Muscle, gut punches are definitely his weakness, both in terms of dizziness and damage, so this fight's almost exclusively left gut punch over and over. The only exception is that Muscle will do a combo where he jabs and hooks, and it can't be cancelled or interrupted, so I opted to have it as the end of phase 2, so I don't have to deal with the reduced damage of stunned punches. Phase 3 is more of the same. The only noteworthy thing is at the start of the fight, Muscle actually decides on when he wants to spit according to the in-game timer, so I have to manipulate that to be a time later than what this fight finishes at, so I don't have to deal with it at all. Now, Sandman is an incredibly silly fight for this challenge. He gets up with a ridiculously high refill at the start of phase 3, so I gotta do some really sneaky stuff. The first phase is identical to the normal speedrun route, but for phase 2, you're going to see the first instance of a delayed frame-perfect punch, which requires a bit of explaining. Generally, when you land a punch and the opponent isn't stunned, it deals more damage and gets the opponent more dizzy than if it were that same punch but the opponent were stunned. However, when you let an opponent's stun expire, there's a 1-frame window at the end of that stun where you can hit him, but the game classifies that stun punch as an unstunned punch instead. Not only that, but the opponent's recoil animation is faster. So every single stun in this fight has me doing one of these frame-perfect punches because I need every single hit point of extra damage in order to avoid a 3-jab combo that Sandman does, and this strategy just barely pulls it off. This specific strategy requires 5 of these mandatory frame-perfect delayed punches in order to pull the strategy off at all. For phase 3, you also need to land unstunned jabs, which are all 25% likely to land, making phase 3 even more brutal overall. And with that, the major circuit is complete, with only 2 circuits remaining. Next up is World Circuit, which is definitely my favorite in this TAS thanks to the final 2 fights in the circuit. First up is Aran Ryan, who has a pretty notorious gimmick where all of your normal punches do absolutely puny damage, but super punches do gargantuan damage. For this challenge, since we don't have access to that, our next best tool is to keep getting Aran Ryan dizzy over and over again for instant knockdowns. The first phase of the fight is completely identical to the normal speedrun route for Aran, and the next phase is slightly different but the same exact principle. The final phase is completely identical to phase 1 because Aran's pattern resets to being the same as phase 1's. I tried a bunch of stuff on this fight, but counter punches are always slower and refills are completely irrelevant because of how little damage your normal punches do, which make dizzy knockdowns the only real way to take him down quickly in this challenge. So the next fight coming up is Heike Kagero, and the main obstacle for this fight is trying to TKO Heike before he can start doing his Mirage Dance attack. Phase 1 of this fight is identical to the normal speedruns phase 1, but for phase 2 I start landing several more left gut punches in a row, then counter an uppercut and do another one of those frame perfect delayed punches to get Heike dizzy again for another dizzy knockdown. I found another phase 2 where it ends up being faster than this one that I'm about to do that doesn't have an uppercut counter, but the issue with it is that it just ends up advancing too far forward in Heike's move script to where I get confronted with the Mirage Dance. And the Mirage Dance is an attack where Heike is completely intangible for a random amount of time, and it ends up just wasting more time than what I was able to save in phase 2, so this was the next best strategy that I could find. Okay, so next up is Mad Clown, and this fight ended up being really fun for me to mess with. I think I found like 7 completely different strategies that all barely topple each other, but then I finally found this one that does several sneaky things in a row. Phase 1 has nothing too special, just landing several random jabs in a row, although one of the jabs needs to be delayed for it to land. The real interesting part is in phase 2. For phase 2, I spend 1 frame at the start of the phase to set Clown's guard low, then immediately cancel his oncoming hook with a jab. Then I throw a mandatory frame perfect counterpunch against Clown's backhand for a faster recoil animation, and this counter actually has a 2-frame variability based on luck, so you need good luck for an earlier counter window. Then I do a delay jab as if I'm throwing a frame perfect delayed punch, but it's more like a frame imperfect punch because I'm throwing it 1 frame after that, so I can get Clown's move timer ticking throughout the entire punch animation so I can get to Clown's next jab faster, netting me a super fast phase 2. Now for phase 3, I do a frame perfect delayed punch again, but a detail I haven't covered about that type of punch is that if you land one of those punches, the opponent's move timer is completely frozen. That's why I waited in phase 2, but in this phase I take advantage of it by landing another jab in a row that wouldn't otherwise be possible, and it lands me another incredibly fast dizzy knockdown. Okay, so here's my favorite fight in this TAS, Super Macho Man. This fight is packed with so much tech, and like Clown, I found a ton of strategies. The fight starts with a single delayed gut punch as opposed to jabs because I want to advance farther in Macho's pattern before he goes dizzy. This phase 1 has a 1 frame margin of error to work, so you can lose 1 frame after hitting that first punch and still get him dizzy, otherwise it's gonna fail. Now phase 2 is nothing too special, just a ton of gut punches since Macho is weak to them in terms of getting dizzy, but phase 3 is where it gets pretty wacky. Before the fight even started, I manipulated Macho's exercise program to have the latest possible delay, which barely gets delayed to the start of phase 3. I selected program B since it's the fastest of the 3 and lets Macho's move timer start ticking as soon as possible. I sneak in 1 guard manipulated jab, cancel his mini spin taunt, duck the mini spin, and stun Macho with a jab. Then I throw a couple more jabs and do another delayed imperfect punch, and follow that up with a couple more jabs. That ended up letting me loop Macho's pattern back to the one he used at the very start of the fight. So I countered his jab, did a delayed frame perfect punch, and countered his next jab, which barely got the TKO. And with that, the World Circuit is finished, with only the Special Circuit remaining. The Special Circuit ended up being quite a bit more simple to strategize, but the luck ends up being really obnoxious to manipulate. Speaking of which, here's Narcis Prince. This fight is miserably luck-based, so I'm not even interested in covering the specific luck events you need here. It's just gonna be a cursory explanation of the strategy. So at the start of the fight, I provoke Narcis to retaliate so I can get him mad as soon as possible. Then I manipulated him to do the left jab, right jab pattern, which allows me to land tons of random jabs to get him dizzy. Phase 2 is really more of the same, although he starts the phase by trying to hit you with a hook, but you can quickly counter it, which allows you to easily get him mad. I manipulate the same pattern from phase 1 and finish the phase with a counterpunch. For phase 3, I land a random gut punch while Narcis's move timer is ticking down to him throwing his jab. Then I manipulated him to do the more common pattern where he opens with a jab on your right side, which I immediately counter for the TKO. Next up is Quarlow, and he's got quite a bit of randomness that we have to contend with too. But despite that, it's not a very complicated fight to talk about since there isn't too many technical things going on aside from one moment near the end of the fight. The first phase of this fight ends up being completely identical to the fastest possible phase 1 in the normal speedrun for Hoi, so there's nothing too special to cover here that I haven't already gone over in other videos of this fight. Phase 2, however, ends up being quite a bit different without the ability to use super punches. So we actually have to get him dizzy again. So we land a ton of random jabs over and over, with a couple of them being delayed so that they perfectly intercept his oncoming attacks near the end of the phase. For phase 3, we land a couple more random jabs, then Hoi goes into his spinning backhand attack, which you can actually counter with a jab. If you counter it frame perfectly though, you end up getting a faster recoil animation, and while he's stunned, I land a frame perfect delayed punch, and then land a final jab for a third dizzy knockdown for the TKO. Next up is Rick Bruiser, and he ends up being a really annoying fight for this challenge. Rick has this unique gimmick of reeling back and counterpunching you anytime you attempt to land an unstunned punch, which is severely limiting for trying to get dizzy knockdowns with most of the attack patterns that Rick has. For phase 1, I opt to not throw any unstunned punch to open the fight, which lets Rick throw his first attack slightly earlier. It gives Rick a slightly higher refill, but the time at the start of this fight is worth more than the extra health in the next phase. Then I just continue to counter his jabs and hook that he throws, and then get him dizzy off of that like normal. For phase 2, I wait until he throws his hook and uppercut and counter both of those. I also throw some slower punches to force his stuns to end early so that I can land a final unstunned punch that makes him reel to the side. But he gets dizzy off of it, so he doesn't get to throw his counter punch. That punch causes Rick's move timer to stay ticking during his reel animation, which allows Rick's combo in this next phase to come out sooner, and because the delay for the combo is so long, I throw an unstunned punch for some needed extra damage. The rest of the phase is just dealing with Rick's combo and countering his jab to deal the rest of the damage needed for the TKO. Okay, we've finally reached the final fight of the game, Nick Bruiser, and his fight is a bit, well, anticlimactic, but there's a couple of interesting things to talk about. So, first off, the time that I get at the end of this first phase seems really promising when compared to the Nick Bruiser record, since it's a faster phase 1 and I have a full super meter, but it's a bit deceiving because of Nick's move timer. See, the moment after I counter Nick and he becomes idle again, Nick decides a specific amount of time he's about to delay until he throws his next punch. The Nick record has this move timer in a really specific spot, and this strategy can't achieve that value. However, I can manipulate that value to be as short as possible since super punches are not needed, so I just do that for every one of Nick's delays. Nick's recoil animation is also faster if you land a counterpunch on the first possible frame, and this TAS ends up doing exactly that for each of them, which are all necessary for each of these dizzy knockdowns. I tried a ton of different stuff, but ultimately this was the best I could come up with for the Nick fight. I'm one frame away from a sub 15 second fight, but it's really tricky to optimize further because of the limitations of what I could really do here. And that's it. That's Super Punch-Out beaten as fast as possible, or at least as far as I could push it on my own in a TAS setting. I was in the mood recently to do some Punch-Out routing and saw a couple of folks talking about this challenge in the Punch-Out Discord server, so I ended up thinking about it for a bit and I decided I wanted to try doing a TAS for it, but I didn't want to reference any known strategies because I wanted to do this project on my own, and this also increased the odds of me finding new stuff. After finishing and comparing to everyone else, I improved almost every best possible time in the game. I know for sure there absolutely has to be improvements that I missed in this task, since there are definitely a couple of fights I was not satisfied with at all, but I was stumped on how to push them any further. Because of that, I'm releasing the task file for this so others can improve upon it if they stumble into some better strategies than what I came up with here. This project was a blast for me to do. I really enjoyed messing around with pushing this game to its limits when you restrict yourself with something like this. I don't really think I'm too interested in doing any of this in a real-time setting with a console or anything, as the luck and execution for these strategies don't really seem that fun to me, but routing it was really cool. If you happen to have any other neat challenge run ideas that you'd like to see for something in Super Punch-Out, feel free to let me know in the comments. If it happens to be interesting enough, then who knows, maybe I'll mess with it. And maybe I might end up being convinced to make a TAS of it if I think it's interesting enough. I do have a couple of ideas I'd like to get around to for some other challenge stuff like this, but I'm not sure when I'll get those projects going, since I feel like I need to learn a lot more about video editing to tackle that stuff in a way that makes more sense to me. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this commentary. If you wanted to watch a version of this task without commentary, I also have an unlisted video in the video description if you'd like to check that out for whatever reason too.
Good night.
So I may as well use this extra time to give an update on the Twitch stuff that I mentioned in the last video. So right now, I'm currently in the middle of preserving my Twitch videos over the past 12 years or so of streaming. I'm not going to back up every single video, but I'm going to try to save anything that I think is noteworthy or interesting, which is going to be most of them. I've also been looking into trying to preserve Twitch chat in each of these videos, but I'm probably going to be picky about which videos I actually do this with. Sometimes Twitch chat just ends up not being worth the trouble, especially since I never had it baked into my stream layout, but I'll be fixing that moving forward for sure though. Once I get enough stuff backed up, I'll be scheduling videos so they automatically go live on this channel gradually over time. I haven't fully decided on what rate I want to do this at. It might be every couple of days, it might be weekly, might even be whenever I feel like it, so if anyone has any strong feelings on what rate they'd like to see these videos released on this channel, definitely let me know in the comments. Alright, I think that's just about everything I can think to say at the moment. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.
Piece of cake.